joining us today for the composting presentation. I'm Tanya from the team of the American Corner Skopje, and me and the team are very happy to have you as participants joining today to our presentation. So as we know, yesterday we marked Earth Day with multiple activities throughout the country. There were a lot of schools and organizations doing actions, cleanup actions and events to express appreciation to our Mother Earth. And we're also very thankful to our partner organizations that join us to the events organized yesterday. And today we're continuing with sharing sustainable tips, since we want to make Earth Day every day, and since we all need to express appreciation and devotion to keeping and preserving the environment with the same passion every day, not only on Earth Day. With that being said, I would like to introduce our wonderful presenters for today, Mr. Jeff Gage, who is a senior facility designer and works for the Green Mountain Technology in Seattle, Washington. And he is a professional environmentalist who practices sustainable habits on a daily basis. And then we have Mr. Reid Deaver, who is the chair of the Green team at the US Embassy Skopje. So both Mr. Deaver and Mr. Gage are members of the Green team of the US Embassy Skopje, who are also devoted to keeping and preserving the environment. So thank you very much for showing us today how can we compost. And before we begin, just 2 technical announcements for our participants. So when you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we will have your question taken. And also, since this will be a great live presentation of composting, please have the speaker mode turned on your video so you can be able to see what we will show during this presentation. And also before we officially begin, if there are something technical issues or difficulties, you can always write us to the American Corner host profile. So with that being said, Mr. Gage and Mr. Deaver, we can start the presentation. Thank you. Jeff and Reid, can you hear us?
You might have to check if your microphone is unmuted.
There we go.
There we go.
Let's try that again.
Yes, we are now. Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Here we go.
Operator error. So Reid Deaver is facilities manager. He's my cameraman, and my name is Jeff Gage, and I am trying to.
They're not on mute yet.
So actually, it would be nice if you could mute your phones.
There they go.
There, perfect. Okay. There's a lot of feedback just then. So welcome. My name's Jeff Gage. I come from Seattle, Washington, up in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. And my work for the past 35 years has been to teach composting, to develop composting facilities. And I wanted to show you a picture of what that kind of looks like. These are composting operations here in Europe. And I'm working and teaming with a company called Compost Systems. Our company, Green Mountain Technologies, is a partner with these folks. And these are very typical of industrial scale or farm scale composting facilities. Each one of the facilities usually has a system in which they can turn, and they usually use turning equipment that is fairly powerful, like this, or they just use a loader down here in this corner. And they use a loader and they move material around, they add water to it, and in about 2 months, they have something which is a beautiful finished compost. So when we do these systems, if we can provide enough oxygen to the system, it doesn't smell bad. If we can provide the right control of how much air we put in, we can manage temperatures so it becomes sanitary. And so that when we're done with our compost, we can sell it to farmers, we can sell it to homeowners as bag product. And this is highly valued by farmers and by homeowners because it provides some nitrogen, but also provides the most important thing we're going to talk about today, which is carbon. Carbon is used by soil. Did you know soil's alive? Soil actually has so many microorganisms in it, they far outnumber all of the particles of sand on the beaches of the world. So the number of microbes that are in our environment and doing work for us every day, most of them exist in the soil. Some are on the surface of our skin, some are on the surface of everything we do, some are on the surface of plants, but the most number of microorganisms are actually in the soil, and what they need is carbon. Carbon is basically old roots. So when you pull a plant out, you can see that it's got all of these little rootlets down there, and those rootlets, when they're no longer feeding moisture and energy up to the plant itself, they die and they are sitting there as food for all the microorganisms. And the microorganisms eat that. They produce sugars and glues and other things, and they actually help bind the soil together to make it pretty. An ugly soil that has no organic matter is shown in this picture here. With 7 years later, this was 1979, this is 1985, by adding compost in, it became very rich, crumbly in structure, and was able to produce huge types of vegetables. So one of the things that we know is by using compost, we can change a soil from a low productivity to a high productivity. And everyone's seen soils in farming land. Oops, let me do one more page here. That look like this. These are dirt. They're not soil. They're dead. There's no microorganisms in them. They barely can provide life for grass. So what ends up happening is you get erosion. And this is a vineyard that has poor soil. Water runs off. It carries the soil away, and we lose that soil forever. It takes tens of thousands of years to create 1 inch of soil. And that soil can be lost in one rain event if it's left bare. So there's a lot of things that we can learn by reading about composting. And there's a lot of things we can learn about how to make things happen and dive way into it. You can go to school for this in environmental studies. You can actually make your career out of it like I have. And it's one of the most useful things you can do because every single community, in fact, every backyard can have a compost system. And it can be done with local technology, local information. And it's basically the know-how of how to manage microbes. So microbes are eating absolutely everything. When we talk about composting, we think of, hey, composting worms. And these worms, basically what they do is they eat our food waste, and then they put out, after it goes through their body, they put out a finished compost right there. So they're like mobile composters. Well, you don't need this. Actually, they're not doing the work. Inside of their gut is microorganisms that are actually eating, putting out enzymes and breaking apart any of the stuff that the worm put into its mouth and making it into an energy form that the worm can use. And then after it's all done, it poops it out. So compost really is nothing but the transformation of live plants that have now been pulled up because they've been weeded, or it's a scrap from your food kitchen, and it's turning it in with microbes eating all that stuff and turning it smaller and smaller and using that as their own food, and then other organisms using them to help further break it down. And then we end up with what's called compost. And compost is not soil. Compost of a very beautiful soil is maybe 5%. And by weight, it's even less. But by volume, it's about 5%. So while everything I'm going to show you might look like soil, this is the food that feeds the microorganisms that makes your soil alive. So if you ever have a degraded soil, adding about that much compost per year onto the soil and either working it in or just leaving it on the surface and allowing the worms to come and bring it down into the soil are some of the ways that we can use the compost that we make. So, are there any questions about what my work is?
I've got a question for you.
Fire away.
Going back to the basics, why is composting important for Earth Day?
Okay, well, here's the problem. All of this beautiful black stuff is about 40% carbon after it's all finished. When it starts at about 80% carbon, and we lose that as CO2 that goes off into the air. This is called renewable carbon. This is carbon that is put back into a plant within the next year or 2 years, and then it actually is part of the natural cycle. If we had no automobiles, no factories and everything else, this is perfectly balancing the carbon that the plants need to pull out of the air to form their plant structure. And then when the plants die, they provide their carbon for the next generation. So carbon dioxide given off by here ends up coming to a very refined form, which is called humus. And that humus stores and locks up carbon in the soil. The soil is able to store more carbon than any of the work that you're doing to plant trees, any of the work that you're doing to try to absorb carbon in any other shape or form. Besides the ocean, the soil is the second biggest storage of carbon in our environment. So as we plow soils, all of a sudden we're exciting that soil to give up all of its carbon, and it can be used up in 2 to 3 to 5 years. A very rich soil, if you just keep plowing it and using it, not adding more organic material back in, that will end up turning into a desert eventually. You're taking away all the energy, all the microbes that are doing the work for you in the soil go away, and all that carbon gets released up into the sky. 25% of the carbon emissions that we have as a worldwide culture in agriculture is formed by the plowing of soil. So there's some real important things that we have to do. We have to take what carbon we can and put it back into the soil so that it stores it again. The other thing that we need to think of is how to quit plowing soil, but to use no-till agriculture, which would basically be putting a slit in the soil, planting your seeds in the slit, and allowing the plants that are on the surface, all their roots to still be there, and just allowing those to be the predominant crop, the seeds that you put in. It's very simple, and it's something that we're trying to teach farmers to do worldwide. In France, in 2015, they said to improve our carbon footprint, we need to all go to no-till farming, and we need to start adding all of the organic matter that we can recover from food waste, from sewage treatment plants, and from cow and animal operations where we grow animals, all of their manure, and including any debris that we might not want. Instead of burning it or putting it into a landfill, we need to put it back into the soil. Close the loop. So poop belongs in soil, but we have to use a certain technology which keeps it clean. And that's why we use composting. Composting will sanitize the material, make it so that it doesn't release nutrients too quickly. It binds those nutrients into that compost and releases it slowly, like a slow release fertilizer. And so composting is the savior, and the lack of plowing will save our planet, because for every 1% of organic matter we can add back in to these degraded soils that have less than 1%, we could have maybe up to 5%. If we could put 0.4% per year into the soil, that would take care of all of the carbon emissions worldwide.
All right, let's check with Tanya to see if there are any questions.
Okay, any questions so far? I think we're all waiting to see the magic.
All right. So I'm sitting here nice and comfortable. It's raining outside. My wife has been cooking me wonderful food. I had coffee. I made myself a fried egg this morning. What do I do with that waste? And what do you do with that waste? Well, the first thing you need is a fancy container to put the food waste in. You can just reuse a container that you might have from mushrooms, or you can have an old cruddy looking piece of reusable plasticware that has a lid, and you can just peel your carrots into here, put the lid over it, and then once a day, take this and drop it and put it outside into your compost system.
Now, I've heard that you shouldn't use oils, right? For your composting.
What can be composted is going to be a very important question. So what we can compost depends on what system we're using. Okay, so if I put in here fat, meat, bones, and I had a dog, and I put it out in just to a pile on top of a pile, there's three things that would show up. Number one are flies. Number two are dogs. And number three are rats. And that is what we don't want to do with our food waste, especially if it has meat, fat, cheese, things like that. So people will say, oh, you're not supposed to compost those. That's not true. If you have a system that puts those meats, fats, and dairy into an enclosed system that dogs can't get at, that flies can't get at, and that rats can't get at, absolutely, they compost beautifully. But then you have to be very purposeful on how you build your pile and what kind of container you put it into. So composting can be coffee grounds, can be tea bags like this right here. It can be eggshells. Here we go, tea bags right here. The paper's good. Even that little piece of metal, the string's good. This fabric is usually good. All of this will compost. If it was once alive, it will compost. That's the easiest way to think about it. So all peelings, all fruit, all vegetables, citrus, everything. If it was once alive, it will compost. The question is, how do you want to manage it so that it doesn't smell bad? Because as we've all experienced, you go to a garbage can and the fish has been in there too long, or the scrapings from like 3 days ago are in there. It's awful. So I try to keep my containers small. I'm going to show you now. Reid, let's get up and walk around.
Let's do it.
So I just took this from my kitchen up in there. This is a beautiful stainless steel composter. It has a handle so I can pick it up and carry it out. It's the same color as my sink. It's made out of the same material. I can wash it no matter what, keep it clean. I can put this right into the dishwasher.
If you didn't have that, how would you substitute? Could you use
You could use anything.
Yeah. Okay.
You can use absolutely anything that you want to live with. But you notice in here, I take a smell. It smells kind of like slightly rotten vegetables and a little bit like coffee. And do you see this nice little thing up here? That's a filter. You know what that is?
Oh, wow.
That is a filter, which is nothing but a scrub brush that I keep moist. And this one is actually coconut coir covered in a little bit of latex. And I've been using this for years. And it just gives you a way that you can pull it out and put it back in, and then it gets air. That providing it air keeps this from getting too stinky. In fact, there's two secret ingredients to composting. I'll tell you the second one right now. Oxygen or air will make the compost pile not stinky and will accelerate the composting process. So now I've got all my food scraps here, and I do this about every 3 days. I try to take it out because my wife likes to cook a lot. Sometimes she can fill this up in one big melee of vegetable chopping. And we'll put our plate scrapings in here too. And then I take it on out. Reid, let's go out to the backyard. Why don't you follow me? So now I have a choice. Out here in my backyard, I've got a number of things that I put together. This is one place that I can compost food waste. I actually got this when I was serving with my wife in India. And this is a composter This was a very simple composter. It's a terracotta lid. Those can be made just about anywhere. And I put the food waste in here. So what you're not seeing is the food waste. Why is that? Because I want to cover any food waste so the flies don't get at it. So I use something which is basically shredded up wood and other fine material. Let me move it over here. This material here is almost looks like old compost, but it's shredded up paper, it's shredded up woody material. And I actually got this in a great big bag. It's called Horticultural Substrate. And this is what I use to cover my food waste so it doesn't smell bad, and so that the flies can't get at it. And to keep the rats out of it, a rat can't lift this up. It's too heavy for them. And they can't chew through it because it's rock. And I'm sure they could.
So it's really good outside to protect it just from rodents. And
rodents. And quite honestly, dogs don't really get into it. They could shove it over if they want. That's why I put it up against the wall. But these guys who make this are in India. Let me show you a couple of things here. This is a stackable system.
Oh, I see the worms.
Yeah, there was a worm that just dodged out here. See him? This guy right here, he's a red wriggler. He just showed up because he found a way in. I have a number of them over here, and he crawled along the ground and went into the container, and he just showed up. And so he's actually eating some of my food waste, but he's down here in the second tier. And you can see down here, there's probably a lot of little guys. And you notice I dig down in, and there's really not that much food waste left, but there's still some. Let me use a gravel, something like this, something gently to lift in. And basically, if you build it, they will come. And you can see them all trying to hide away. They don't like the light. Can you see them there?
Yeah. And
they're going to try to hide from the light. So they want someplace dark, moist, and that has food waste available. Now, you look at all this food waste, I put, except for this one bit of, this looks like a rotten orange. No, that might be a apple.
Apple.
That was an apple that had gone bad. I put the whole thing in there, and it's mostly healed up. So what I do is basically put the food waste in directly. Where's my container? Can you hand that to me?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So basically, I just put the food waste directly in here. Now, to get an idea of what we can compost, you can see I've got onions, I've got eggshells, I've got tea bags, I've got some mushrooms, a lime, lots of carrots. And you can see that the stuff that I just did yesterday looks pretty good, but as you get to the bottom, it's already starting to turn a little ugly and wet and even a little moldy. So I just knock that all out, and I'll clean that here in a second. Put the lid back on it.
Does mold make any difference?
Mold is lovely. No, mold is part of those microorganisms that we're trying to encourage. And then what I do is I take my spreading tool and I just try to push it down and tamp it down, because I want to make room for everything else, and I don't want to have a lot of airspace in this kind of composting. And then all I do is I'll take some of my substrate here, and I'll just cover the top of it. And the reason you do this is you want to absorb liquid. Food waste has over 80% moisture in the material, and the layer underneath this is actually going to absorb the moisture from the food waste. As food waste starts to decompose, it releases a lot of moisture. And if I do this, all of a sudden, Reid, does that smell? Can you smell anything?
No.
No, it's gone. That little covering of substrate is all that it needs to give what it needs. So basically, then I just put the lid back on and we're done. And I go through this stage after stage. I end up with,
there are
there's three stages. And the bottom one I take out and I screen out anything that might be left over and throw it back in the top.
Tanya, are you getting excited about composting?
Yes, we can't wait to hear the experiences from our participants and how do they do composting.
Okay, so now there's another way to do composting. I want you to come over here. This is a bin that I made here.
So this is a completely second different
This is
way that you could compost.
You could compost this way. This is a hot, fast compost pile. So let's say you're working in your backyard and you want to have a lot of yard waste coming in. You don't want, there's not enough room in that food waste bin that I just showed you, right? So what we do is we have a pile that we can use a pitchfork on. And that pitchfork allows us to get into a pile and turn it. And when you turn compost piles, you can actually get a lot of heat out of them. And so if I was doing that food waste in this pile, I would come in here, I'd dig a little hole down in the middle like that. I'd put the food waste in, and then I would cover it with the old compost. And then all the worms and everybody is going to be really happy. They're going to go after it. And the compost will actually stop any smell from coming out. So it won't attract dogs. It won't attract any of the worms.
Yeah.
And I mean, any of the rats or the flies. So that's really nice. That's an easy way to do that. If you have basically 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter kind of container, and an easy way to maybe pull out the material by putting removable boards in the front. I just built this, found some wire in the background from some garden wire, stapled that onto the sides. I put boards on the inside. I just made it out of stuff. You can make a compost pile out of almost anything. As long as you're trying to go 1 meter cubed, you will always have enough space for a backyard and have plenty of operational working. I typically though like to have a spot for 2 bins, and that way I can take it all out at once and throw it into the other side, and then start with another big batch of stuff that I harvest from the garden. So fresh grass clippings, any leaves, any prunings, any weeds, I put them in here. There is one thing that I wanted to talk to you about with preparing materials going in. A lawnmower does a beautiful job. In fact, it makes it, you know, you got really wet, succulent pieces of grass, and there'll be a whole big pile of them. They're going to mat up and turn almost greasy.
What about tree trimmings?
Tree trimmings, absolutely. Let me show you tree trimmings. Come on back over here. So every plant, anything that was once living, will decompose. So if you have tree trimmings, you're going to want to try to chop them up into small pieces. Now, this is kind of hard without a system called a chipper. You can buy chippers from, there's local stores that have chippers for your backyard, or I'll show you my favorite device, which is this. Now, every culture across the planet that I've gone over the last 11 years of traveling within the Foreign Service has some form of machete. This is the form that we have here. No, actually, I got this one in India. Sorry, you can tell it looks very Indian. But this edge right here, we keep sharp. And I basically use a piece of wood and I chop with this. And I actually use a board on the backside and I chop any long pieces up. So if you run into pieces like this, right, you can just chop them up. Sorry. Right? And anything that's smaller than your hand usually will compost. So anything smaller than your finger and not much longer than your hand, as it can spread, that's about the right size and it will eventually compost. The reason is plants, just like our skin, if they're alive, they have a natural defense against microorganisms infecting them. So we want to be able to break into the inside of a plant so that the microorganisms can get past those natural defenses and start infecting this material, basically. So the best way to make sure you've got things composting is to mash it, bash it, chop it, whatever it takes. Doesn't take much. You can still leave them reasonably big. And then the last secret. I told you there were two secrets, right? One was oxygen. Notice I have a lot of air that can come into this pile. I can turn it to add more porosity so air can easily flow through the material. But the second ingredient is this right here. What is this, guys? What am I showing you?
Looks like water.
Looks like water. Water is in this thin film of water that's on my hands. This is where microbes start to live, where they start to multiply and they spread out. And they do that on the surface of the composting materials. And they multiply very rapidly with maybe 2 hours to 24 hours. You can have a significant increase in microbial population. So once it's been chopped up, that when it's fresh, you want to put it into a compost pile because all the food for those microorganisms that they're looking for is there. And what it requires is just a little bit of moisture on the top. So if I grab a large material of stuff in here, I'm going to do the magic by doing this. I grab myself a hose and I just give it a slight amount of water over the surface. And if I think that wasn't enough, I give it a little mix and add a little bit more into it. And that gives us what the microbes need to do their business, multiply, have lots of solvent because water is the universal solvent. And if you add water and organic matter together, it will compost one way or the other. Now, if you do it without air, it'll go anaerobic and generate methane gas. Is methane gas a problem? Yes, it is. It can also be a benefit. If you can fully enclose anything that's generating methane, you can use that methane to actually make cooking fuel, or you can compress it and use it to run a car. All of these things with methane are really cool, but the trouble is if it just happens naturally, let's say you put it into a landfill and that methane starts generating because there's no air in that landfill. That methane is 40 times more impactful on CO2 emissions than just regular carbon dioxide. So I told you this makes carbon dioxide as a byproduct. About half of it turns into carbon dioxide. The other half stays here and is available for food for the soil. So we're making compost. It's basically put it in a pile, a meter by a meter by a meter, and make sure it stays moist, not overly wet. Because if you put too much water in, it's like drowning in a swamp. It will smell bad. It's a problem. So it's probably too wet. You should be able to grab, I almost grabbed a worm. Let's make sure I'm not grabbing any worms here. No, no worms. You should be able to grab a handful of compost and do this to it and have maybe 1 drop of water. You notice I just watered it. So that one was a little too wet. You should be able to see moisture on your hands. So I'm going to go just a little bit below where I didn't overwater it. Okay, what do we got in there? No worms. Okay, so I'm going to squeeze it again. And if you squeeze as hard as you can, you'll see just a little bit of water coming out right there from my hand. And it holds into a nice tight ball, but it's not sopping wet. So it can still breathe. The microbes have plenty of moisture and it will compost and continue to break down. So the only reason you really need to turn is if you're going to bury something in, if it's gotten too tight and dense and you need to fluff it up a little bit so that air can still keep going in, or if you need to add water. So that's really the miracle of composting is right here. That's the secret. So there's a lot of techniques to doing composting. I'm going to show you one more compost bin that I've got out here. We can back out. So I just got this at the local store. And this is a composter that has grass clippings that we just cut the last weekend and put in. And I'm going to pretend this because I staged this for you guys. So basically you just keep adding it on as long as you make sure it's moist and maybe mix around the top a little bit so it doesn't get greasy. Anything, little bits of trimmings, if you're trimming any of this, any of your weeds and seeds and everything else that goes with it goes into here. And you just allow it to decompose naturally and maybe water it once in a while. So the question is, why don't you leave the lid open? Because it's going to get too wet maybe. So you got to be careful. And this allows you to manage how much moisture goes into your system. And you notice it has air holes all along the side to allow it to go. When you're done, they've got a door on each side of this that you can take off and end up with your finished compost at the bottom and dig it out with a pitchfork. So this is this is the normal. This is called static composting. It's not meant to be turned. If you wanted to, we could lift this up and move it to another spot and chuck things over. I prefer an open bin that I can get at. So this is much better if you have a dog or if you have some other animal. This kind of protects it from everything around. And as long as you bury your food waste in it, in the inside of the pile, and not just throw it over the surface, but have a tool right next to there, be able to make a little hole, put the food in and cover it back over. This also works well for food waste.
Fantastic.
Okay. So let's go sit down on our, over here. I'm going to show you that this is compost that I've been making myself, and I'm ready to plant in here. I mixed it with soil that I had, and basically you can put about a ½ an inch in a year on a normal soil. You tamp it down, you plant your seeds.
So you just plant directly into there.
Plant directly in there and not worry about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so questions. That's it.
All right. That is composting 101.
I guess everyone were saving the questions for this part. So here we go. So we have a question from Vesna and then Marco. Vesna, please go ahead.
Jeff, hi, thank you for the great presentation.
Sure.
I have a question about the worms. Where do you get them? Are they an essential part? For example, because I live in an apartment and maybe I would like to get like a terracotta planter. Do I have to have worms? How, do they speed up the process? How do they impact the whole thing?
Well, what I want you to do is go online and learn about worms. North Carolina State University, Rhonda Sherman wrote a book. She's a friend of mine. And you need to read about worms because they won't be able to handle the fats, the meats, and the dairy. They don't like them. They do okay with citrus and all of your fruits and vegetables. And those worms, actually, I didn't buy any worms. They just show up. So if you start with you can go out to your apartment and make a small compost pile somewhere in a corner and start feeding a little bit of food waste and other things that's in contact with the soil. The worms will show up. And then you can start harvesting those worms and build up enough worms so that it works. It takes about, for every kilo of food waste that you put in per day, you need a kilo of worms. But most of us produce maybe a quarter of a kilo at the very most per day. So a quarter kilo of worms is probably about the right amount to start with, and then feed the food waste slowly into that system. It can be a normal box out on your veranda, but it needs to be out of the sun. And if it's going to get really cold out, you need to protect it from the cold. So what I do with my worms is I take them into I have a little garage out here, and I put it where my car is. And that way I can keep them from freezing. They'll go up together in a tight little ball and try to protect themselves, but a really deep cold, you got to protect them. So in Minnesota, where the temperatures are really, really cold, the woman who wrote Worms Eat My Garbage just decided to use heat tape, which is what you use for water pipes to keep them from freezing. And that would keep a little bit of heat going so that the worms were happy. So yes, you can. You can also go talk to some fishermen down at the river and ask them where they get their worms, because there are people in Skopje. I was told to talk to the fishermen that were next to, just across from the government offices there, and that they would have them. I've never really talked to the guys, but you know, I've been told that's a good source, or at least they'll tell you where they got theirs.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Vesna, I hope you got all of the information needed from the answer. I mean, I'm sure. Now, Marco, please go ahead with your question.
Hi, my question is actually also about the worms.
Okay.
And I was wondering when the compost is finished and you need to sell it or pack it or whatever you do with it, what happens to the worms? Do you have to take them out one by one? Or do they just...
It's really cool. So let's go ahead and do it. Let me think. Do I have a surface that I want to use for that? I think I do. Let's set it up. I'm going to show you how to harvest worms, okay? Here we go. So first, what I need is a plastic tarp. I think I've got one right here. Here we go. Okay, let's go save some worms.
Saving worms.
This is best done on a bright sunny day, but if you don't have a bright sunny day, come on over. So I know I have worms in here.
I saw them.
I'm just gonna dive down and see how many I can get. I want to put it into this bucket.
Yep.
Here. It's going too much.
Careful behind you.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, there's that. Oops.
All right, a bucket full of worms.
Well, there'll be some. It's a little dry where I'm at right now. Let's see if I can go over there and find any. Not as many. That's where I've screened out some material. Let me just move this board out. Sorry, guys, this fork is too tall. I'm gonna have to use another one. See that? There we go. There they all are.
Oh, yeah.
Nope, not on this side. That's interesting.
So then you move this to the mat?
Yeah, so okay. All right, you little worms, time to hide. So you bunch them all together. See, there's one there. Bunch them all together. And then you do the following. You wait perhaps 5 minutes, and any of the worms on the surface, like this guy here, he's going to dive down in. These guys there, they're going to dive down in. And when they dive down in, they're trying to get away from the light, which is why I like to do it on a bright sunny day rather than a wet day like this. They don't actually mind being out in this weather as much as they do in the sunny weather. So then what I do is I slowly go through and I remove the top layer. And all I do is just move it out little bit by little bit, just off the surface. And try to make sure I don't get any worms. And they'll start diving towards the middle as I remove material away, just taking off maybe half an inch, quarter inch. Ooh, look at this bad boy that I found.
Oh my gosh.
He's
Wow.
a grub. He's going to turn into some sort of a moth or something else. Oops, go back in. So basically, I do this until they all come down into the middle. And then it's a big log of worms. And then you pick the log up, put it back into your bin, and you've got compost that has a whole lot of worm eggs. And let's see if we can find some worm eggs for you. Worm eggs look like little grapes, little green grapes.
I've never seen a worm egg.
Yeah, let's see if we find any in here. It's they're not hard to find.
There's another worm.
Yeah, there's worms. Let's keep on go down in. I'm looking for.
So Marco, are you still there?
Yeah, still here.
So what do
Marco,
you think?
how did you get interested in composting?
I don't know. When I started learning about different ways to reduce and recycle, composting was one of the things that popped up, and it was something that I had never tried, and I didn't know how it was done. So that's why
Yeah,
I'm here.
Great.
so I'm still looking. I'm not finding them. They're not as dense here as they are usually in a pile. In a
There are a lot
functional
of
worm
worms
bin.
in there.
There's a lot of worms in here. And I didn't add any worms. They all showed up on their own. And I've been doing this compost pile for about a year. And in a year, I've only made in this with a yard and putting all the harvested materials in that bin. No food waste really much in this system. I would always put it in the enclosed bins. And after I was done with the enclosed bins, most of it was eaten up. Then I would put it in with this. But I'm still looking at, it's kind of interesting, but this is kind of what you do to harvest anyway. Just kind of roll material off and they'll just keep concentrating down and away from you and away from the light. And sorry, unless you pick one up by mistake. But you see, you can still see little roots. You can still see all kinds of things that didn't break down. And all they do is take a little bit longer, but they're not going to impact your use of this in a planting media, because all the bacteria and fungi that were trying to do their work have already done it on the easy to eat material. So I even have some fresher grass right there. I'm gonna be putting that back in. But basically we give here's a baby worm.
Oh yeah.
He's got to go back in. And basically they're just gonna keep diving down to the middle. And it takes I usually spend about an hour doing this kind of work to harvest my worms. And sometimes I use just a little shovel, but I prefer to use my hands because if I run into a worm, they don't get damaged.
Great.
Worms are safe. Thank you for the practical answer, Jeff.
Okay.
It couldn't be explained better. So next is Marina. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for this very interesting presentation. I actually bought recently the composer container that you showed at last, the green one, but it's black.
Yes.
from one market. I think it's Mercur, or I don't remember. It's my husband that bought it. And we were trying like for now 3 weeks to do the composting, but we read so many articles, videos, YouTube, and I'm now confused. And this is, I think you are now clearing my confusion in this sense. So we were initially putting everything like from eggs that you mentioned to food waste, but even cooked food waste. And then oh yeah, this is what I wanted to confirm. And then my husband saw on YouTube no food cooked waste like dairy and meat, etc., because there will be rats. We are living in Sonja, if you know, I probably know, and it's a lot of dogs outside. We have also a dog. It's a garden that it's circled by a fence, etc. So we were afraid
you have
that
cats.
No, we don't have cats, but there are
Your
cats
neighbors
around.
have cats? I have
There are
so many
cats around.
around
So
here.
my
I've got
question
5
was,
cats.
yeah, sorry.
If you have cats, they'll take care of the mice and the rats. No problem.
Okay, yeah, so I should buy a cat, definitely. And yeah, so do we continue putting their dairy and you know, meat, etc., all those cooked things, cooked?
Sure. Here's the problem though. You need to have enough other material.
Okay.
So I put no more than, by volume, 25% food to 75% other plant material or that substrate that I showed you. I usually get one large big bale each year of that substrate, and I make sure that I keep the food waste to a smaller percentage. Otherwise, there's not enough space in this. It's just going to start smelling bad. There's not enough way to move air through it. So you have to blend it in with some of this stuff that's going to absorb the moisture, and in fact, absorb a little bit of fat and have it on the surface of it, because fat decomposes, but not in a big glob. It likes to have a thin surface. So fat's kind of a challenge, but you won't be throwing away too much fat as long as you don't put a whole vat of frying oil into your compost. It will still decompose reasonably well.
In this particular container, because it's closed, right, and there is air, there are holes in it, and etc. But do we need to put also a layer of dirt and mix it up, or just?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Put the substrate over the top.
Okay.
The absorbent material over the top. Then when you put in more material, put another layer over it.
Okay.
Okay. Soil does not work very well. Soil doesn't have much compost, maybe 5% compost in it. It wants the organic matter because it's going to absorb more of the moisture, and it's going to absorb the nutrients, and it's also food, and the microbes will live on it easier. So that's why I like to get a large bag of substrate and make that stuff.
So layer by layer, let's say. And do
layer by layer is okay. But here's another important lesson. You can layer it just to make it easy at the beginning, but you're going to want to turn that and mix it, because that layer could turn really nasty and greasy too. So blending it in is actually better, and then a thin covering of the no food waste material on top. So typically I would put in my food waste, I'd work it into that top surface layer that I had there before, and then I cover it with another, after it's all mixed in, I would cover it with a thin layer of that substrate over the surface.
Okay. Can I ask another question?
Of course.
I saw your, it's not a pot, but where you planted at the end, the black one. Is it what kind of material it is? Where did you bought it?
Cool. So in landfilling, we use, I worked for landfill for 15 years. We had something that was called geotextile.
Yeah,
and
geotextile,
what we used it for was to protect the liners, which are made out of heavy gauge plastic, and still allow water to go through so we could drain. We'd put a drainage layer on top of the plastic, and then we put, like rock, and then we put this material over the top. Well, now they're selling these as well stitched, it's thick. I've used these all over the world, and I carry them with me so I don't have to do that. And I do all my vegetable growing in these pots. So this one's called Geopot. That's the company name that got it. and I like it because it's portable. I only fill them halfway though, so I fold the lips over because that's a lot of compost.
Like 30 centimeters, I guess, like 30,
yeah,
30
yeah,
centimeters.
yeah. That's, well, I really only need about 20 centimeters of depth for growing a good planting, and this is precious to me. I have to fill these things up when I get to a new place, and I don't like buying soil. So I do buy soil always to start, and then I add as much compost as I can into it. You notice it almost looks like compost on the surface, right?
It does.
Yeah.
Do you know perhaps if here in Skopje we can find this material, this pot, or you don't know, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah, you do?
So, well, all you need to do is go talk to any of your nurseries. And I actually went to talk to a nursery, said, I want some of your soil there that you're, digging up, or that you're emptying pots or whatever you're doing. Can you give me some of that? And they bagged it up into one of those great big bulk bags for me, threw it in the back of my car, and I took it home. And that's what I would do. They're your experts. If I know nothing, when I show up to a place, I befriend, I go buy their plants, and then I say, hey, I need some soil too. What can I do?
No, I was thinking, I was meaning about the geotextile. The
geotextile.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know anybody here doing it. I think you could, if you can find an ordering service that brings and imports things out of Europe, you can easily find those there.
Okay.
But
thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Marina, we're very happy to hear that more and more families are composting. Our next question is coming from our friends from the Volunteer Center Skopje.
Okay. Come on in.
Hi guys. My question is, how would you compost if you lived in a flat? Is that even possible?
This is a really good question. I would do worm composting if I lived in a flat. I would buy, those regular containers they use for storing stuff in. They're plastics, rectangular, about that deep with a lid over it. I'd buy one of those. Actually, I'd probably buy two. And I'd stack one on the bottom and the other one on the top. The one that's on the top, I would drill holes in to make sure it drained well. And then I would get shredded paper and shredded cardboard. I'd watch the videos about worm composting. And I would take as many worms as you can find, put them in, and then slowly feed them, food waste. And just to make it easy for them, initially I would chop it up really fine so that it's easy for them to get at it. Eventually you won't have to, they'll do the chomping themselves. But you chop it up real fine, give them little bits, and grow up the population. It takes probably 2 to 3 months before a worm will actually have eggs and make more eggs, and then they have to hatch, they have to grow. So it takes a while to build a population from something small. But if you can buy the worms already made and just start with them, think about one part by weight of worms to 1 part of how much food waste per day you're going to put in. And that's about what they'll be able to consume. And there's a lot of techniques to doing it. You put it in one side and the worms will all migrate around to it, put it over there into another spot, and then they'll migrate there when they're done eating that first spot. So then you can actually harvest from one side and they'll all be over on the other side where you last put the food waste, and then put in some more bedding and just keep going through that cycle. And have a tarp that you can, harvest your worms on out on the patio. I've done it. It works.
Yes.
I've also done another thing which does work around here, soldier fly, black soldier fly composting. So write that down, black soldier fly. And they work similarly to worms. They actually have a larvae stage, and they exist here in Skopje. They end up being a fly that flies around, but it doesn't It's not like the housefly that bothers you.
Are those the really small ones?
They're longer and skinnier. And they're black soldier flies, but they don't stay in the house. They're not like a domestic fly, but they work very effectively at eating stuff, and you'll be amazed when you look up black soldier fly composting. It's another way to do it. The trouble is, I did that in India, and they kept crawling out, and they actually crawled into the house every once in a while too. So I had to sweep the larvae out because they try to go to someplace warm and dry after they're done eating. So anyway, I don't recommend those necessarily unless you have a really well-designed bucket system for them, which I never did.
Thanks, Jeff, for sharing that. Thanks also for the question. The next question comes from Buena.
Hi, Jeff. You said earlier that we can put eggshells in the composting ground. So what I would like to ask, what are the benefits of the eggshells when we put them while we are composting?
Well, they don't break down very fast, but the eggshells have a little bit of protein on them. There's always a little bit of eggshell whites or egg whites in with the shell typically, and they'll eat that part, which is the part that can go bad or smell bad. But then the shell itself is made out of calcium, and calcium is a necessary nutrient in the soil. So eventually, as they get cracked and broke down, you probably saw some of those eggshells in my compost over here. Let me show you. Yeah. So even so, I eat a lot of eggs, and here they are here. You'll find that the worms actually like to hide in them, but look, they really are able to get further broken down. But quite honestly, they are not a problem in here, and they will become eventually food for these guys. So now look, on the surface, I had all those worms. They've all dived down, right? And I'm trying to keep this pile separate from there. They've all tried to hide away. By the way, this is the egg casing of a black soldier fly. That's what they look like, they're larvae. But this is an old shell of one. So they show up and they do their part. Oh, here we go, getting down there. We're almost to the bottom. See, I didn't really have to wait too long for these guys to do what they're going to do. In fact, I bet you if I go to the bottom here right now, we're going to find where most of the worms are. Yep, there they are, mostly right there on the bottom. So that basically, as soon as they're nicely concentrated, then I just take those guys out. But that's kind of what I do on a very purposeful process. And then there's not so many worms over here. You can see that there really aren't that many worms on this side. And even if there are, they'll be fine wherever they go as long as they're going into some planting place. But they just move away from the sunshine here. I don't worry about the eggshells. It's one of those parts of food waste that once it's alive, it will turn back into soil and be something that's useful for the plants. Okay?
Okay, and I would like one more question to ask you.
Sure.
So if you could have only 3 things to put in the ground for composting, what would they be? Only 3. What would you put?
Tough question.
So coffee grounds are like the best. If you don't drink coffee, I would say anything that comes from vegetables. So there's many different types of vegetables. I wouldn't want to use onions because they have a little sulfur in them. But cabbage would be perfect. And I'd like to have that cabbage chopped. So not just big leaves of it, but something chopped. I'd also like to put in, so coffee grounds, cabbage, and carrots.
If you didn't have coffee grounds, if you didn't drink coffee, what would you substitute that for? Or would it be,
I wouldn't worry about it. It wouldn't matter.
Okay.
No, it's just they like coffee.
Okay.
It gives them a little bit of a...
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So now I will read 2 more questions from the chat box, and then we can take 1 more question from the audience before ending. So Jeff, one of the questions is, how long does it take to reach the finished product? So how long does it take to make the compost and be ready and safe to use?
Okay. So at home, give yourself about anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. So with an industrial composting facility like I designed, the quickest we've been able to make a finished product ready for sale is 26 days.
Mm-hmm. So that's like the minimum.
Well, I had to work really hard to do that. I had to turn it like once every 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
I had to make sure it was initially ground, and I had to provide air. So I actually had a small blower that would blow air through the piles. And then I managed the temperature between 45 degrees and 60 degrees, never hotter than 65. And if I do that, that's the optimum temperature. Between 45 and 55 is kind of the optimum temperature for microbes to do their work. So by managing the right temperature, making sure it had the right moisture, stayed turned and actively moved, I was able to make finished product in 26 days. So you can do that if you want to spend that time and energy. But the reason we do that in industrial size is if you don't, then it might take 3 months, it might take 6 months.
Yeah.
And in that 3 months, 6 months, on the same area that I put the compost down, I probably could have made 5 other batches or 6 other batches. So I try to accelerate and optimize the process, keeping the right temperature and moisture and air to make it a faster, more accelerated process. And it puts off a lot of heat that way.
If I may note, so composting requires like the right conditions, but also time and patience. As when you were saving the worms, let's say, also it requires, so it's really a nice, relaxing, let's say, activity.
I really don't work hard. Maybe 4 times a year, I pay attention to my compost pile. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I cut the grass, I just dump it in. Maybe I mix it a little bit just to make sure it doesn't make a greasy layer of wet, slimy material.
So providing the optimal conditions and giving it time. Yes.
Just give it time. And it really is no work if you do it that way. I have some other really cool systems I want to show you that we're planning to use here at US Embassy Skopje. And Reid, shall we show them our new tool?
All right.
Okay. So the green team has been trying to find different ways that we can reduce our carbon footprint at the embassy. And we have a small restaurant inside that cooks food for us called American Cafe. And we also have people bring their own food. And we want to give them a place that they could compost the food scraps. This is a rotating compost room. This also works well for an outside yard, but as you can tell, it really wouldn't work inside a house. They make smaller versions of these that are tighter, that work pretty well. But let me show you what's on the inside here. All it is a tumbler. And basically it's off center. It's got this bar off to the side so that as material comes in, it'll kind of break itself up and you can rotate it. The trouble is if it has any liquids in it, which I told you when food waste decomposes, it generates liquid, that water would come out through here because that's not a sealed bit. So you have to do it on soil or put a pan underneath it and then clean the pan after it drips. But what's really nice about this is you can put a whole lot of material in there pretty easy. And then, oh, did you notice something else? They put in little air holes here. So they're allowing the air to come in from the side of here and come out through these air holes. So that when you filled up what you're gonna do, you can close this, latch it, and instead of using a pitchfork, you just do this. Maybe 3-4 times around is enough to mix it and make it do what it's needing to do. And then you're ready to put in more material. Rats can't get at it, dogs can't get at it, flies can't get at it. There's no place for that. So you can put food waste in here. Again, you want some absorbent material with this. And this is for small scale. You can also just dig a large hole in the ground and put layers of food waste and the substrate in, and then maybe have 2 or 3 of those systems with a lid, so that, and that's the other system that we're going to use. It's called direct burial, but the reality is if you make 3 different spots, you can let one rest, you can fill up the second one, let that one rest, fill up the third one. By the time you're ready to go back to the first one, it'll all be beautiful compost. And so you can dig it out and have room for that. And it's direct contact with the soil. There's no leachate. Animals can't get at it. That's the other system we're going to be using at the embassy. Plus, we just take yard waste and we spread it out in thin layers, and we use a rototiller to actually blend the leaves with the grass. And we have a watering system called Rain. And in the summertime, we come out and bring a hose out there to make sure it stays the right moisture. So those are the ways the green team has put in place at the US Embassy in Skopje for managing our organic waste. Been doing it about 1.5 years now.
Yeah.
And this we just got about a month ago, right?
Yes.
And
yeah,
so that's why it's here, so I could show you it's not full. They actually emptied it for me so I could bring it here and show it to you. I'm going to take this back to the embassy here this afternoon.
Thank you very much for showing us what's like new in the world of composting. And before we end, because we've mentioned shredded paper a few times, so can you please just briefly explain us what kind of paper? Is it the regular office paper we use every day, or is it some special kind of paper that will accelerate composting?
So the worms' favorite paper is cardboard.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason they like cardboard is it still has a lot of nutrient and sugar in it. White paper is not as good. There's not much there for them. You could use anything that comes out of an office shredder, as long as they only put paper into it. And that has room for them to get around and do this. It kind of bunches up and it's not as comfortable. But they love cardboard because you've seen those inner wiggling parts, interior layers. They actually like to go in there and use those for their homes. So I take shredded cardboard. I shred it into 1 foot, about 2 centimeter wide pieces. And I just use a box knife to cut them. And I soak it in water first. And then I use it for my worms. And that's their favorite. You can also use newspaper. But if you use newspaper, you want to, again, tear it up into strips. And the newspaper works. The office paper is not as good. It goes through a different pulping process that uses sulfur as part of it's called sulfite paper. And they sometimes bleach it too. So it could have residual stuff that the worms just don't like as much, but it still gives them a place to absorb some of the moisture, a place to live that isn't in the food waste. The worms actually eat at the food waste. They don't live in the food waste. They like to live in something else next to the food waste. So you want to give them that bedding material for them to live in, and then let them work on the food waste that you put into it in one spot, and then another, and then another, and then another.
Thank you very much. I think that makes it crystal clear.
Okay.
Now we will give a chance to one more question from the audience if someone would like to share an experience or something. Okay, if not, I would like to thank you. Firstly, thank you for this exclusive live presentation on composting. For us at the American Corner Skopje, we haven't seen this kind of presentation so far. And I believe it was also interesting for our participants who stayed with us till the end. Thank you so much. And we hope you got useful information that you will implement in the future composting process in your homes. And now, Jeff and Reid, back to you with your words and encouraging message for our participants.
Okay. So here's Reid. Reid and I, here, let's do it as a selfie.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Reid's been holding this camera too long. So this is important. I've been doing this 35 years of my working career. Reid's been working on environmental protection throughout his career. This is important work that you can get paid to do. The world appreciates environmental engineers. They appreciate people who go that extra mile to clean our air, clean our water, and to clean our soil and to make our soils healthier. And without people like us, our world would be dirty, messy, and not much fun to live in.
And people all like you.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. If you want to be an ecologist, if you want to be an environmentalist, there's work for you. We need you in the industry. This is one of the biggest growth industries in the world right now. And organic agriculture is one of the biggest growth sectors of agriculture. Everything is moving towards sustainable agriculture. They need to have good management of organic waste coming out of cities so it doesn't go into landfills. Retain that resource, get it into the soil in a clean and sanitary way. And that's my job. I've never had a boring day at work. There is so much work all over the world. I'm going to put a new facility in Saudi Arabia, of all places. And boy, do they need that compost. In fact, they're importing compost from different countries just to make their plants grow, because all they have is desert. And if you're not careful with the soil that you have here in North Macedonia, you too could become desert. Civilizations live and die on their soil, and we are losing an incredible amount of our arable land. Almost half of the European Union footprint every year is lost to desertification. Without adding compost, we're not going to make it, guys. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And we need you to join. You can do it in your backyard, you can do it in your apartment. Just make sure that the compost that you make gets back into the soil after you're done. And everybody will be happy.
Thank you all for participating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and for this great reminder of how each of us can give its part to taking care of our environment. Thanks again, and have a nice day, everyone. Bye-bye till the next time. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.